So this here is a 1936 Ford Fordor Deluxe Sedan. I drove it out here on this service road for this field to get some good shots of it. It's a really nice car. It's got no rust almost anywhere. Bones are really good. The engine is all there. Everything's original. It runs, it drives. It just needs basically everything gone through. Everything that works doesn't work very well, so needs to be tweaked and gone through, and just kind of all the little things repaired. And the interior needs redone. So I'm gonna be restoring this car, not fully like a concourse restoration, big freaking deal, but it's gonna be all the little things that affect the driving experience. I'm gonna fix. I'm gonna make it all mechanically sound. I'm gonna replace the interior. I'm gonna have the seats reupholstered. I might touch up the paint a little bit just to make it kind of a really good condition driver. So yeah, well, let's start up the engine and you can hear it running, and I'll show that here so you can see how it runs, and you'll be able to tell it needs some work done. The plugs need to be replaced. Carburetor needs to be rebuilt. I have a kit for that sort of thing. So let's dive into it. All right, so I'm sitting in the car now. So these old cars, a lot of the stuff that is automatic on today's cars was all manual in these. So you can see right here, this little knob, it says choke on it. It's hard to tell, but there it is. That's the choke for the engine. It basically, it reduces the amount of air that's going to the carburetor. So you can use that to affect the mixture of the engine when you start it, and that'll help you to start a cold engine. But it's not cold. I just drove it out here. You can see that the temperature gauge here reads in the middle, in the normal range. So we are not starting it cold, we're starting it hot. The starter is down on the floor there, right there. That's the starter button. You don't turn the key. The key is to unlock the steering column, and then you turn on the ignition with this switch here, and that makes it so that you'll have spark so that you can start the engine. So when you start one of these old cars, what you got to do is you make sure that you're in neutral. So I'm in the middle of my H pattern on my 3-speed transmission. That means I'm in neutral, so I'm not going to be turning the transmission when I crank the starter. If you're paranoid, you can push in the clutch, but I just have the parking brake pulled here, which just actuates these mechanical brakes. Then I can hit the starter. Nothing happens. This engine, it needs a little gas to get going. If you've got it all tuned up properly, it'll just start with almost nothing. You just give it a little gas, but give it a little gas and crank it again and we'll get it started. Oops. I forgot to turn the ignition on. See, this is what happened. You got to remember the whole procedure for starting it. So the ignition is on, now it'll start. Okay, there, I just started the engine. So you can see these gauges work. You see the ammeter there. When I rev up the engine, it rises towards the plus. That means the battery is charging. Here on the left, we have the oil pressure gauge. When you rev up the engine, That also will rise, indicating that you are getting oil pressure in the engine. So that's all working. Let's see here. One interesting thing about these old cars, they had a throttle knob right here, which is essentially it just actuates the accelerator. So you can pull on this, you can watch the accelerator drop, and the engine revs up. You can use that to set the idle point if you're just sitting there and you need it to idle higher, you don't want to be bothered to press your foot down. Or you can use it as a sort of primitive cruise control to keep the car going at the same speed on the road if you want. Let's see, let's open up the hood and we'll take a look at the engine and see it running. Okay, so I've opened up the hood and here you can see the engine. It's all there, it's all complete, and it's all original. I think maybe except for the generator, which may have been rebuilt at some point, or maybe it was just repainted. I'm not sure. But there's the original engine. This is a V8, 8-cylinder Ford flathead V8. Now, this was the engine that Ford used in all of their cars from 1932 all the way through 1953. It was a big deal when it came out because up to this point Ford had only used 4-cylinder engines in their cars. Most of the other companies were using 6-cylinder, straight 6 engines, 6 cylinders in just a straight line pattern instead of this V shape. And if I go around to the other side, you can see the cylinders are slanted at a 90-degree angle towards the crankshaft in a V shape. Nobody had made a cheap V8 engine up to this point. They were all very expensive. You could buy a Cadillac V8 or V12 or something, but they were really expensive. Nobody really made them cheap. Ford figured out how to cast the entire block, I think, in one piece, which reduced the cost of manufacturing and made it so that he could sell a V8 car to the general public, the average customer, in 1932, right in the middle of the Depression. That was a big deal. And it was such a good, reliable, and bulletproof engine that Ford just kept on using it. They used it all the way through 1953. That's a span of, 21 years. So that's huge. This is a 36 model. So this is the earlier version of the flathead. It's got, you can see there are bolts with nuts holding the head down. That's one of the telltale signs. The later flatheads had, no, hold on a minute. I think it was the later flatheads that had bolts. This is studs. It's basically the same engine, except the later ones made more horsepower. This one makes 85 horsepower. The later ones made 90, and then 100, then 110. And I think that the most powerful one they made was 125 or something. It's got this one dual barrel carburetor on it. I think that's a dual barrel. Stromberg 97. That's what it is. But yeah, everything is there. Everything's original, but it all needs to be worked on. It all needs to be gone through. Lots of things are just starting to fall apart on it. The wiring is all original. That all needs to be done. I don't know if you can see here, but it's hard to see. You can't really see it, but it's just kind of falling apart. It kind of turns brittle. This old wiring, it was covered with cloth. Most modern wiring is covered with rubber, but this right here, you can see it's a cloth insulated wire. So that's coming apart. So I have all of the wiring. I just bought reproduction wiring for the car, so I'm going to be working on that today, getting all the wiring replaced. That is just a huge thing. You always need to do that with these cars. It's just a peace of mind thing. It's a safety thing. You want to get that all back to the way it came out of the factory, so that you're not worried about wires shorting out and your car catching on fire or whatever else. So that needs to be done. These spark plugs, they may or may not be original. I don't think they are, but they are old. I think they might be from the 50s or the 60s, but I think they're probably all gummed up inside of there. They need to be replaced, so I'm going to be replacing those. The carburetor needs to be rebuilt. They usually do. You can tell it's not quite working the way it should. So I have a rebuild kit for the carburetor that I bought. The little things need to be done, like the air filter here probably needs to be cleaned out. It's probably clogged. This belt is chewed up. It needs to be replaced. I have a replacement belt in the mail. It's coming. And it's hard to see down here. I don't know if you can see. It's way down in there, but the distributor is there too. You can kind of see it. That will need to be gone through. It'll need to be at least adjusted, probably the points replaced, because those are probably just not working that well anymore. This engine also, one of the Ford innovations with this engine was a vacuum operated advance on the timing in the distributor. So if you know anything about engines, the timing of the sparks and the spark plugs needs to be adjusted as the engine revs higher and as it revs under load, because the motion of the pistons is faster, and so you need to change when the spark happens. So that is usually in a completely manually operated engine. That'll be accomplished through a lever just on the steering column or something. That's how the Model A's were. You would manually advance or retard your spark depending on how fast you're going, or if you're going up a hill or something. But in this engine, it's done via a vacuum system. It uses the engine vacuum that the engine pulls as it revs up higher to advance and retard the spark, and that is connected to the distributor. I don't know if you can see here. Yeah, you can see it. It's right here. That right there, that is a vacuum tube that goes down to the distributor. Now that can often be messed up inside of there, so I need to address that, look at that, make sure that's still working properly, or get this engine all back up to shape. The fuel system is mostly fine. This is a glass fuel filter here. I think the way it works is that any particulate matter in the fuel will just kind of sink to the bottom, and you can kind of see there's some in there. That right there is a mechanical fuel pump. That's original. That pulls in the fuel tank back in there and sends it to the carburetor. A lot of times you'll see people have replaced that mechanical fuel pump with an electric one. They'll put it back, in the back near the fuel tank on the frame or something, and that's not original. It works, it probably works a little better than this mechanical one. It sends fuel immediately to the engine instead of you having to crank it for a while to get it in. But it's nice to have the original stock system on this car. That's what these cars should be. They should be all original, all stock, as much as you can get them, because they aren't that way very much anymore. You don't find them like that. You do, but these early V8s especially, they were very popular for hot rodding back in the day, and still today. People will buy them and they'll chop them up. They'll paint them some hideous neon color and turn them into some ridiculous monster car, and it's not respectful to the way that these cars were meant to be. And the more you do that, the less the original ones are still around, and they get more expensive. You want to restore them to original condition. They've been rotted so much that it's to the point where it's really difficult to find an original 32, 33, 34 Ford, because they have all been just mangled and modified in so many ways, then you find an original one and they'll cost you $30,000 for one that needs full restoration. And it's just, it it's good to take these cars and just get them mechanically sound, cosmetically the way they were, restore them to the way that they were meant to be, the way they were designed to operate and function by the engineers at Ford or whatever other company back in the day. Because it really, when you work on these cars, it gives you an appreciation for the ingenuity of these engineers, because they didn't have computers or anything. They didn't have any of our fancy modern technology. In the modern day, if you want to solve an engineering problem, well, you put a microcontroller in it and you program it to do X, Y, and Z. They didn't have that luxury. What they had to do is solve every problem electromechanically or purely mechanically in some physical way. If there was a problem to be solved, there was a physical mechanical armature that would solve the problem for you, or something, so that's every single problem that needed to be solved with these engines and with these cars is solved that way. And you'll realize that when you start to work on them, just how ingenious they had to be to make the whole system work. And anything that was automatic, it was done mechanically. It's really, really cool to see, and it all does work. When you get these cars running well and the way that they were meant to be, they work really well. It was really, I like these early V8s because they were really an accomplishment in design and engineering for these cars back in the day. A huge improvement over the Model A cars, which just had a little 4-cylinder engine, and could maybe cruise at about 45 miles an hour. Well, this car will go 60 or 70 if you push it, and it just has a lot more power. It was a really cool thing. If you had one of these cars, you had made it. You were the cool guy on the block. All your neighbors had the 6-cylinder Chevys or Plymouths. You had the Ford flathead V8 engine, 8 cylinders. That meant a lot. So that's what I'll be doing. I will be restoring this car mechanically and cosmetically to my satisfaction. Like I said, it won't be a full-on restoration. It'll just be getting it all, safe, mechanically sound, working all the way it was supposed to, and then getting the interior all reupholstered and touching up the paint and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really nice project to have. I found this car in Idaho. That's where I'm from originally. Here I'm in Colorado. The car was in near Boise, and that's where my parents live. My dad was kind enough to go get the car and trailer it down here with me. We're kind of working together on this project a little bit because he has a very similar car that he has restored. So it's just a really cool thing. You got to pass down this knowledge. You got to keep it going, because there just aren't that many of these cars left, and there are less and less of them, and there's less and less people that know how to work on them. And so it's really important to kind of make sure that knowledge does not become lost knowledge, because it's important, it's cool. This is a piece of American history. This was the era of American steel, American manufacturing. We were making everything here. Everything that's in this car, I believe, was made in the United States. Most of it right there in the Ford factory in Michigan. And it's just cool that way. We don't really do that anymore. In fact, our cars are some of the very few things that we do still make here, and even then there's, you know, it's not 100% American made, and so it's just cool. It's just cool. You got to preserve this stuff and this history, and you know, maybe look forward to a time when we can do that again. It's kind of important. So yeah, that's what I'll be doing. I'll be restoring this, and I'll be documenting it with videos, and you can see that. So hope you enjoy. Thanks.